very interesting topic came up this past week with Activision revealing a result of a kind of study they did regarding skill-based matchmaking and whether or not it helped or harmed the Call of Duty games and again competitive and casual multiplayer. And it's a really great discussion for today regarding why you need some kind of matchmaking ranking system for a multiplayer game, and also, once again, why you should never listen to esports or high level players when it comes to the sustainability and the livelihood of your online games. This is a great continuation of the video we did a few weeks ago about whether or not esports has really helped or hurt game dev and the industry as a whole, and I'll include a link to that somewhere around here now. The study that Activision was trying to do, basically they still turned off their matchmaking for 50% of the player base, and they did a test to see whether or not this was helping or hurting the game. As it turns out, not having matchmaking was greatly hurting the game for a larger audience of players. And it kind of drives home some very important points about building and maintaining an online community for any kind of multiplayer game. Now, as we've talked about in the past, multiplayer communities of competitive style games and stuff like that, they live or die based on how they can sustain and grow their consumer base. And for any kind of multiplayer game in the world, whether it is some kind of simple puzzle game, super competitive, high elo game, and everything in between, you will always have three kinds of players. You have your casual newcomer crowds, the people who come in and check a game when it's on sale, when there's a free weekend, when they see it being mentioned by their favorite YouTuber, streamer, whatever. You have the core consumer base. These are the people who are your kind of standard ones. Maybe they'll play every weekend, maybe they'll play with their friends from time to time. This is where you're going to make up the bulk of your audience of players. And then you have the hardcore super elite. If we're talking about a game that has any kind of competitive, season, rank modes, this is where that group falls into. And this represents the absolute highest level of play of your game and the absolute minority of your game. And this is, again, something that I talked about in the previous video about esports, that a lot of people felt like the esports competitive side was going to dominate and become a major aspect of game dev and just making a game. It turns out it didn't. And the reason why is that when we talk about this highest of the high level of a game, you have maybe a percent, maybe less than 2 to 3% of the actual overall player base of your game being at this level, and that's a very important thing to understand. As I talked about in the previous video, one of the biggest misconceptions and biggest traps you can fall into as a developer is solely creating a game for the esports competitive crowd. That, again, 1 to 3% of your player base. You see, the trap is saying that if the skill curve of the game is super duper high, that only the most elite of the elitists of your player base can reach it, that's going to make it appealing to everyone else. As it turns out, no. And this again goes back to this idea of having these three distinct groups of players. And this is, again, why you need an ELO ranking or matchmaking. When people are playing a multiplayer game, the reason why an ELO system is so important is that you don't want someone to feel like they are just there to essentially be the sacrificial lamb to a higher level player. And one of the things that the study was pulling from, and I'll try to include a link to it if I can find it as well in the description, is that people want matches to feel like they had a chance at winning. You don't want it to feel like, okay, I'm a level 3 player, and now I'm going up against a level 99 one with the greatest gear and skills and all that. Because, again, to get back to what we've talked about previously, people of kind of the casual, low level, they're not learning or improving anything by going against the top 100 players in the world. They're just going to get immediately crushed, have no idea why, end up getting frustrated and quit. And conversely, good high level players, the ones that you should be kind of paying attention to, they want close matches. They want to improve. They want to be tested. And going against someone who just literally installed the game 10 minutes ago doesn't help them at all. And while a lot of people on social media are trying to debunk this and say that it's wrong and all that, it kind of gets at one of the major points of why you shouldn't listen to the elitist players, esports streamers, YouTubers, that kind of audience who don't like skill-based matchmaking. They don't want to appear to, well, suck at these games. So they're fine with playing against newcomers and people who are low levels, and the infamous debate over Smurf accounts. But when you're trying to create an online game or an online community, you want to kind of corral your players around these different groups. You don't want, again, low levels interacting with the high levels and vice versa. And this is why an elo system and matchmaking are so important. Because you want to be able to allow people to play with those of even or maybe slightly higher, slightly lower levels. As a very interesting aside, a few years ago we talked about how Activision patented a matchmaking system to put people based on their monetization. And the fact that they're now doing a study to kind of prove that skill-based matchmaking is important is kind of weird in that respect. It's good, but it's still very weird. And when you're trying to create these kinds of online games, you want to be able to create an experience that's going to be as widely accepted or as widely preferred as possible. And again, goes back to a very important point. Games that were designed solely for the elite level, high level competitive players really did not do well in their respective markets. Because as I talked about when it comes to the RTS genre, a lot of what the casual and core players wanted was interesting unit designs, very asymmetrical play, wacky stories, cure-offs, and so on. But a lot of the people who try to design the next great RTS eSport, well, they removed all that. They streamlined it so much that, yes, it makes these games very competitive, but it doesn't make them interesting for everyone else. And I still need to do a video talking about StarCraft 2 and kind of how they managed to appease both groups. But to get back to the subject at hand, matchmaking in any kind of ranking system is absolutely required. Because at the end of the day, you want people to experience a game with like-minded or even skilled players. And there are ways, again, to incentivize or kind of keep people playing with their respective levels. One thing that I did like from Gwent was they introduced not only seasonal play, but they did have the pro seasonal ladder. That this was only available to people who were consistently playing at the highest level, who participate in their tournaments, because those people wanted to play at that highest level. They wanted to train with like-minded individuals. And again, you don't get value if you're trying to improve your skills if you're just playing against low-level people. And this also meant, as a very good point, that it kept those high-level players as far away from everyone else. And if your game has any kind of, again, progression, ranking up, new weapons, kill streaks, cards, whatever, you do not want high-level players to be interacting with newcomers and low levels in that respect. If a high-level gun does 3 times more damage than someone who's just starting out, why would you put that person against someone who, quite frankly, couldn't even try and compete with them? I still remember when I tried to play season play of Hearthstone one time, and for my account that was maybe a week old, they matched me up with someone who basically every other turn threw a legendary card. It was just basically like a Yu-Gi-Oh match, except I was one of the newcomer guys and not one of the main characters. And this is, again, why you need to have these systems and why it's important to have an established kind of rule set or some kind of metric for how your matchmaking works and how people can go up in it. For any game, as I said, that has progression built into its matchmaking and ranking system, that needs to be a factor. A common system that some developers will like to use is they'll have kind of like a soft gear rating system. So let's say every 5 levels, you unlock a new weapon, sword, gun, armor, whatever. And then that becomes a factor in the matchmaking. If I'm using level 20 gear, I should not be anywhere close to someone who's maybe level 5 or level 10. Maybe I could be fighting a level 15, maybe I could be fighting a level 25, but it's not a case where you want, again, with abstracted progression, such a disparity between the different players. And to go back to the point regarding their monetization matchmaking, this was what made it very concerning about them trying to implement that and patent that. That if you can say, okay, this player hasn't spent any money, I'm going to match him up with someone who spent $10,000 in my game and has all the swords and all the guns and all the super fancy skins, that's going to get very frustrating to play. And looking at the document, one of the things I found very interesting, and it's another major hallmark of any kind of matchmaking system, is defining skill. This sounds very simple in practice, but it again gets at one of the hardest things when it comes to balancing and designing a multiplayer experience. What makes a good player at your game? Now, some of you will immediately point out, well, wins. If I keep winning, then I must be a good player, right? But again, how you facilitate good play in a game, or how you define good play in a game, is very hard to do. A good example of this is kind of the runaround that's been happening with Dead by Daylight, and a lot of people and creators and players who have been arguing with the developers about this. So they did a big review, or they were having like a discussion about this a few years ago, where the developers were arguing that skill at Dead by Daylight was basically, well, hooking the other players, which if you haven't played Dead by Daylight, that's as a killer hitting the player twice, putting them on the hook, and after 3 hooks, that player is knocked out of the match. And for the survivor side, it's obviously not getting hooked. But you see, when it's that simplistic, it creates a very big problem. There are many ways in any game to show off skill that's not necessarily about winning or losing. If I'm playing a team-based shooter, and through my play, I keep my entire team alive. Let's say I'm really good at counter shooting, or I'm really good at providing support, healing, defending, buffs, stuff like that. I am not getting kills, but I am helping my teammates stay alive and get kills. Does that make me a good player? Does that make me a bad player? This gets back at kind of the age-old discussion of like MMO raids. And is it good to have someone on your team who knows how to tank? Well, they're not getting kills, but conversely, they're keeping their teams or their teammates from not dying, and they're getting kills. So is that tank a good or bad player? Now, obviously, all of you watching this will say, yeah, if a tank is tanking, a healer is healing, a supporter is supporting, those are really great players. But if your games, if you have a matchmaking or a skill-based system and you're not factoring in those other elements, you can have the situation where, yes, that player is really damn good at supporting, but guess what? They didn't get enough kills in this match, and we're going to lower their rating, or we're not going to match them with even players. And for someone who's just running around stealing all the gear, killing everything. They're not being a team player. But look how high their kill ratio is. They must be a professional player. It doesn't work that way. And when you are designing your systems and when you're thinking about how your game plays, you have to, as a developer, understand, what do I expect out of my players and what do I reward? Because if this is not in sync, it can lead to the game just not feeling right. And more importantly, leads to players just not having a good experience. And as a very important point, this is also where we get to this elitist mindset that, oh, you didn't get enough kills during this match, or you're a horrible player. You're the reason why we lost, despite the fact that you've been healing everyone, or you revived the entire team 5 times during a match. And it gets back to that earlier point about why you should not be listening solely to the elitist esports crowd. Because if they're only in this for the glory cams, the super kills, kill streaks, and all that, and they don't understand that, hey, having someone on the team who can block a little bit more, or who can reflect damage or heal, is very important, it's going to lead to a frustrating experience. It's going to lead to a very homogenized experience as well. And kind of the final point I want to talk about, when this breaks down, when a game becomes so focused on having the right way or the professional way of playing a game, it leads to these experiences becoming far worse. Because now it becomes a case of, oh, you're not playing as the meta character, you're not playing as the super fancy ultimate best gun, best sword, best bow in the game, then you're obviously hurting the team. And look at you, you're not getting kills. Yeah, you healed me, wow, big whoop. Get good, scrub. And it leads to a lot of people leaving these games. And then it leads to the online becoming very fixed. Oh, everyone's only going to play as the same 5 champions, or the same 5 heroes, or they prefer the exact same guns. How exciting is that for a core or casual player? The competitive super high levels, yeah, that's fine for them. But again, it doesn't lead to a healthy online community. And if you don't have that, then guess what? You don't have a sustainable game. Yes, that hardcore minority is going to play your game day after day, week after week. They'll make all the streams and all the videos of all their headshots and all that. But here's the problem. They're not going to be supporting this game for anything that's not high-level play. You want to try and get more casual players in? You want to have a fancy collab, or add more to the maps, or do more crazy interesting things? They're not going to allow it. And they're not going to support it either. And if you're trying to build a game further, it's going to lead to frustration on your part when people aren't going to be spending that money. And time after time, we see developers, especially in the fighting game side, have the struggle with long-term sustainability of their games. Yeah, people may check out when there's a new character, maybe they'll try out there's new skins, but if the entire game is focused on the competitive play and there's nothing new, nothing exciting to get people interested in playing this game at the core casual level, they're not sticking around. They're not going to be really interested in spending more in this game, and your game will once again devolve into this case of just nothing but the elitist players wanting to play it. But again, that is not sustainable, and we have seen time and time again how multiplayer games that only cater to this group, they will nosedive in terms of concurrent or sustained players in their games. So yes, while people will be making videos on it, and there will be some excitement, if a casual player signs up for a game, and they are immediately destroyed and cursed at, and they have no idea how to play this game, and everyone's just yelling at them, they are not sticking around. And the proof of this, again, is in the churn rates. for these games. Yes, there may be high-level players who are making fantastic videos on this, but if the churn rate of your game is 80 to 90% of the player base quits after 5 matches, that's not really a great game. And it's not one that's going to be long-term financially viable for you. So to wrap things up, the document which I was reading this in between takes is very fascinating and is definitely a good read for any developer or even any consumer who plays or consumes competitive games. Because again, you may think that just having a space for everyone to play is going to lead to a sustainable and healthy online community. But you need to curate this. You need to set a standard for low, mid, high, competitive level play. And you need to make sure that your player base is kept within their respective fields. And yes, people can move in and out. We have seen this plenty of times. Someone starts playing a game, they get really good at it, they become a core player. Then they get really damn good at it and they try again to the eSports side. There is nothing wrong with this, but you still need to maintain an atmosphere and space that people can move in and out very easily. If your game is incredibly not casual or newcomer friendly, you're not going to get more people playing. If it's not core friendly, if it's only for kind of the hardcore super elite, a lot of people are just not going to stick around or want to stick around when every match just feels like they're getting their head bashed in and there's no room to grow. If you start playing a game and you are getting double perfect, I should say, every single match, you're not really learning anything at that point. And if you're not learning how to improve, you're not going to want to stick around. And there is certainly a discussion to be had about good onboarding when it comes to competitive games. And that, I would love to get like a developer on to discuss that point. But with that said, for those of you watching this, what are your thoughts on skill-based matchmaking, competitive play, ELO scores, and all that? For any one of you who have tried to take that step to be the next great EVO player, or the next great Call of Duty, or Rainbow Six Siege, or whatever, what was it like doing that grind and that climb? Let me know in the comments down below, and let me know if it's my turn to now try and compete at EVO in the future. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.